Welcome back. We're now well on our way to creating a functional character. The character patrols until it has a target, and as soon as it has a target, well then this left branch will fail, and the selector will move on to the right branch, where if the enemy is not stunned, the enemy will move to the character. Now we'd also like the enemy to be able to attack, and to do that, we're going to need to do some work to set this up. So let's go ahead and get started in this video. Now, I'd like the enemy to have another overlap sphere, and that sphere is going to be a bit smaller. It's going to be around the enemy. And as soon as we're in that sphere, then we're going to say we're in attack range. So we're going to have a Boolean that will be true when we're in attack range and false when we're not. That means we're going to need an overlap event for this sphere. Let's go ahead and set this up. So I'm here in enemy.h. I'm going to scroll up to our private variables and create a new private variable. And this is going to be a bool. I'm going to call this be in attack range. Now, just like be stunned, I'm going to make this a U property with blueprint read write edit anywhere category combat. So I'm just going to copy that U property and paste it right on be in attack range. And I'll give this a comment and say true when in attack range, time to attack. Now we're also going to need a overlap sphere. So we're going to use U sphere component here. So we're going to say U sphere component, and that's a pointer. We're going to call this combat range sphere. And the combat range sphere can be edit anywhere, blueprint read write, category combat. So I'm going to copy the U property for the aggro sphere and use that. So I'm going to paste that right here for our combat range sphere. And we're going to say for the comment, sphere for attack range. Now we need to create this in the constructor. So we're going to go into enemy.cpp where we're constructing our other sphere, aggro sphere, and we're going to construct the combat range sphere here. So we're going to say create default subobject, and this will be a U sphere component. And we're going to say for the text, combat range, and I'm going to go ahead and call setup attachment. So combat range sphere setup attachment and attach it to the root. So get root component. And we can give this a simple little comment saying create the combat range sphere. Okay, so we're going to need a callback function for the overlap event that we're going to set up for the combat range sphere. Now let's go back and declare that in enemy.h up here in the protected section. We're going to create a void function, and we're going to call this combat range overlap. And we're going to copy the input parameters for aggro sphere overlap and use those. So go ahead and paste those in. Going to make that nice and pretty. And we can go ahead and create a function body for this. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is create a function for when we end overlapping with the combat range sphere. So we're going to call this void combat range end overlap. And for this one, we can take a look at our item.h, and in here search for end overlap. And here's our on-sphere end overlap. We can take these input parameters and copy them. And we can come back and paste them in to combat range end overlap. And now we have an end overlap function, and we can go ahead and create a function body for this. And there we go. Now, in order for these to work with our overlap events, we need these to be U functions. So let's give these both U function macros. So now it's time to bind these functions to begin and end overlaps for the combat range sphere. So we're going to do that in begin play. So here in enemy.cpp begin play, we're going to do the binding here. So we're going to say combat range sphere on component begin overlap dot add dynamic. Now we're going to pass in this and our callback function we just created called enemy combat range and overlap. Now we're also going to bind to onComponent end overlap. So we're going to say combat range sphere onComponent end overlap dot add dynamic. Now for this one, we're going to say this and enemy combat range end overlap. And we'll see that add dynamic has an error under it, and that's because it looks like I used combat range end overlap, but I meant to use combat range overlap. And add dynamic will know if you're passing a function in that does not have the correct signature for this onComponent begin overlap. So that's why we were getting the error there. So now we've bound these functions to the overlap and end overlap events. Now we need to add functionality to these. Now, we're going to have this Boolean that we created called in attack range. We're also going to want a bool key for our blackboard. So let's go back in the editor, open up our enemy blackboard, and go ahead and add a new key to this. I'm going to add a new key of type bool, and this will be called in attack range. Go ahead and save that. Now, here in C++, we're going to go into our new functions we just created called combat range overlap and combat range end overlap. Let's find those. And here we're going to do a couple things. First, we're going to set be in attack range. And I'm going to set this to true for combat range overlap and false for combat range end overlap. So that's going to set our enemy's Boolean values to true or false. But then we need to set the blackboard keys as well. So we're going to get our enemy controller. First, we need to check to see if it's valid. And if it is, we're going to get enemy controller, get blackboard component, and from there, we're going to call the familiar function set value as bool. Now this is going to take a name. We're going to pass in a text string using the text macro, and we called this in attack range. So the key name is going to be in attack range. And for the value in combat range overlap, we're going to set it to true. Now we're going to do the same exact thing in combat range end overlap, except for it's not going to be true, it's going to be false. So we're going to set the value as bool using in attack range, and we're setting it to false. Okay, so now we have a system where whenever the enemy is in range, we have a Boolean that represents whether or not we're in attack range, so we can use that. And then our blackboard also has a bool key that we will have set to true when we're in range and false when we're not. Now these overlap and end overlap functions will be called whenever anything overlaps with this overlap sphere. So we also need to place a check to make sure the other actor is of the correct type. So we're going to actually add an if check to make sure other actor is not null. So we're going to say if other actor is null pointer, return. We're going to first do that. And then we're going to cast the other actor to a shooter character. So we're going to say auto shooter character equals cast to a shooter character, other actor. Now, if this cast is successful, then we can perform these actions. So let's go ahead and say if shooter character, and then we'll move these lines of code inside the if check here. Now we can do the same thing in the end overlap function. So let's go into combat range end overlap, and we'll paste in if other actor is null, return. Then we'll get an auto shooter character and cast other actor to shooter character. And if shooter character, then we will simply set our values here. So we're going to go ahead and stick those in the if check. Okay, let's go ahead and compile this and we can test this back in the editor. Now I'm here in enemy BP, and here's the combat range sphere. I'm going to go ahead and bring that sphere radius up a bit so that it's encompassing the entire enemy. So we're going to bring it up to about, say, 130. And when we're within this sphere, then we will consider this in attack range. Okay, so back in the editor, I have the behavior tree open here, and I am going to show the in attack range bool key and make sure we can see that while we're playing. So let's go ahead and hit play, and we can run up to the enemy and make sure the enemy gets in the attack range. And it looks like we can't really see the in attack range. There it is. It says true. Now I'm going to go ahead and run away, and now it's false as we're running away from the enemy. And if I stop running, it becomes true as the enemy comes within close range. So we now have an in attack range Boolean key for our blackboard. And this is something we can use here in the behavior tree. Now, in the next video, we're going to use this in attack range to determine whether or not we should attack. So we're going to need to set up some things in order to enable the enemy to attack the character, but we can use in attack range to determine whether or not it's an appropriate time to attack. All right, I'll see you in the next video.